Finally, the nuisance is gone. From today, we're living with my parents at my house.
Matthew's words hung in the air as I stood dumbfounded in front of our demolished family home, right after my parents had passed away.
What are you talking about?
Have you lost your mind too? Hurry up and bring the inheritance over to my place. I couldn't help but burst into laughter at his words. I see. So that's what this was about. What? Why are you laughing?
You guys don't know?
Know what? As I laughed, Matthew and the in-laws looked at me quizzically. It was then that I decided to tell them the truth. My name is Madison. I was born the eldest daughter in a family of ordinary full-time working parents. I have one older brother. A perfectly normal family. At 29, I married my husband Matthew, and we had 2 children. Juggling work and child-rearing, before I knew it, I was already 55. Our son, Kenneth, and our daughter, Amelia, had grown up and become respectable members of society. They were both living on their own, struggling with their new careers. Now it was time for Matthew and me to enjoy some peace. It was a plain life, but a happy one. I had always thought we would continue to age together like this. But then, one winter day, everything changed. Dad was in a traffic accident and passed away suddenly. He was only 72 at the time. Our family was engulfed in sorrow, especially since Dad had been so healthy. Mom was particularly devastated, hardly able to eat.
Mom, I know you're sad, but you have to eat.
I kept telling Mom this over and over.
I know, but I just don't have an appetite. It feels like there's a lump in my chest.
My brother and I thought Mom was just going through a rough emotional patch, so we watched her for a while. But then, Mom's weight started to drop rapidly in just half a month. Worried, I decided to take her to the hospital.
What? Cancer?
I was stunned when the doctor diagnosed Mom with cancer. It was advanced and inoperable, and she only had about a year left. I hadn't been able to do enough for my parents yet. Just when I thought we had only lost Dad, now Mom was going through this. I was even more devastated than when Dad passed away. But there was no time to stay sad forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied upon. So, it was up to me to help Mom. I immediately told Matthew that I wanted to live with Mom. I couldn't leave Mom alone, both emotionally and physically, in her illness. But Matthew's reaction was not what I expected.
What? We just finished the funeral, and now I have to deal with your parents again?
Matthew said this with a sigh, sounding annoyed.
You don't have to say it like that. Isn't it enough to just drive her to and from the hospital? Why do we have to live together? I think she'll feel lonely. If it's not okay, maybe I can live at my parents' house for a while?
I suggested. Then, Matthew said indignantly.
What? And who's going to take care of my meals then? I'll come over to cook, of course. What about cleaning? Laundry? Who's going to do all that?
I was rendered speechless. I intended to do what I could, but I couldn't handle everything as usual. His pointed remarks hurt. I couldn't argue back if someone said that my desire to help and nurse Mom was just my selfishness. I knew Mom would probably hesitate and insist that everything should stay the same. But I desperately wanted to show my filial piety.
Fine, but I'm not helping with anything, understand?
Matthew grudgingly said this to me, who was silent. Although his attitude was arrogant, he had ultimately given in.
I'm sorry, and thank you.
Even though I thought he was being quite terrible, he had agreed to my request. I held back my desire to retort and expressed my gratitude. Despite the disagreement, Matthew and I started living with Mom at my parents' home. We had been living in company housing provided by Matthew's company. Matthew was an only child. Thomas had expressed a desire to live together, so there were no plans to buy a home, and eventually, we were supposed to live in the in-laws' house. While he was still working, the company housing was more convenient for commuting, and the rent was only about $300 a month, not a significant burden. However, Moving to my parents' house eliminated that expense, and the house was more spacious. I think living together wasn't all downsides for Matthew. As he had declared, Matthew didn't help with anything, but I was happy to be able to live with Mom. Mom seemed energetic, but she often felt weak and spent a lot of time lying down during the day. I prepare meals for Mom and make sure she eats them. I also arrange her medication. Doing all this alone would have been impossible for Mom. I'm sorry, Madison. Thank you. It's a big help to have you here. I should thank Matthew too. Mom expressed her gratitude to us many times. I hadn't told her about the harsh words Matthew had said when we decided to live together, so she seemed grateful to him as well. One evening, after Mom had gone to bed and Matthew had come home, I served him dinner and said, "About Mom's treatment." But Matthew glared at me and said, "Don't tell me about it. I don't want to hear it. I told you I'm not helping." And refused to listen. I too wanted to vent or seek advice from someone. All I wanted was for Matthew to just listen. Matthew's attitude didn't change, not after a month, nor after 2. He complained about living with my mother, acting as if he was doing a great favor by agreeing to it. His behavior became increasingly arrogant and dismissive day by day. But I couldn't really say anything in response. The stress of worrying about Mom and being considerate of Matthew was building up. Around the time when a year had passed since Mom's terminal diagnosis, her health rapidly deteriorated, and she was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Despite being mentally prepared, I was deeply saddened. My brother's family and my children rushed to support me, but in times like these, you really want your spouse by your side. However, Matthew just laughed and chatted with the in-laws in a corner, not helping with the funeral at all. My brother took on the role of the chief mourner, and we somehow managed to prepare for the funeral. But Matthew sat at the very back of the relative seats when he should be seated at the bereaved family seats.
Matthew, I'd like you to sit in the bereaved family seats.
When I said this, Matthew replied, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all."
But you are my husband.
Then Addison, who was listening to our conversation, chimed in.
He may be your husband, but he's not your mom's son, right?
Matthew is my son, so he's an outsider.
That's right. We're Matthew's only parents. You can sit in the bereaved family seats, Madison.
Hearing the in-laws say this, I fell silent. While traditions may vary by region, in our area, it's customary for sons-in-law to sit in the bereaved family seats. As expected, when relatives noticed Matthew wasn't in the bereaved family seats, I overheard whispers like,
"Did they get divorced?"
It was embarrassing, and while those gossiping were at fault too, it would have been resolved if Matthew had just sat there. I felt a bit resentful that Matthew wasn't by my side, but we managed to give Mom a proper send-off. After the funeral, we returned home with my brother's family, my children, Matthew, and the in-laws.
Thomas, Addison, thank you for coming during this busy time.
I expressed my gratitude to the in-laws and served them coffee. Then, they said, laughing, "Really though?
First your father passed away, and now your mother.
It's been quite costly for us too. But at least it's over now." I was stunned by their words. How could they say such things? I couldn't believe what they were saying. I forced a smile and left the room, trying my best to keep my composure. Then, as I walked away, I could hear the conversation between the in-laws and Matthew behind me.
Matthew, it must have been hard for you, living with someone else's family.
Yeah, Madison's stubbornness was quite a challenge.
You shouldn't always give in to your wife. It's okay to say no in a marriage.
I clenched my fist. Their voices, chatting and laughing, filled me with anger and frustration, but this wasn't new. The in-laws had always been insensitive and rude. When I married Matthew,
couldn't you have found someone more attractive?
I worry about the grandkids' looks, Addison declared.
They say beauty bores you after 3 days.
With Madison, that's unlikely to happen, he said. Matthew laughed at these rude comments. It was a pattern with this family. Something in me snapped. I realized that neither the in-laws nor Matthew had ever said a word of comfort to me, not during Dad's funeral, nor after Mom passed. Instead, they mocked me. Matthew's behavior and attitude as a person started to raise questions in my mind. I thought I had been too considerate towards Matthew when all I wanted was to do something for Mom. If Matthew had been supportive towards me, it would be one thing. But he wasn't, and there was absolutely no reason for me to feel so guilty towards him. My growing anger was overshadowed by the ongoing laughter and chit-chat of the in-laws and Matthew in the background. If my brother's family or the kids had overheard them, they would have been upset, but luckily, they were all in the kitchen. I was the only one who heard their conversation since I was in a different room, which was a relief. As I was contemplating all this, Addison's voice once again reached my ears.
Madison.
Yes? I turned to respond.
Can I take this?
Addison was holding Mom's handbag. I was perplexed, not understanding what was meant by that. Addison responded to me, saying,
Your mom can't use it anymore, right? Matthew said it's okay to take it.
Addison was examining the bag as if appraising it. It was so disrespectful, especially right after the funeral. I took the bag away. No, you can't.
Huh?
Her expression changed, showing not just anger about having the bag taken away, but also that I, her daughter-in-law, had dared to stand up to her. Despite the intensity of her expression, I stood my ground and responded with equal determination.
We're not ready to go through Mom's belongings yet. We'll divide her things among family members later.
Addison was furious.
What? Are you saying I'm an outsider? Didn't you just say at the funeral that even Matthew was an outsider? How does that make you family?
I couldn't help but retort. Hearing my words, Matthew and Thomas also turned red.
What are you saying? Apologize to Mom. How rude for a wife to say such things.
Hearing the commotion, everyone else came from the other room.
After all the effort we put in, attending the funeral and cremation, to be called an outsider. Let's go, Thomas.
Addison yelled at me in front of everyone and left our house. Matthew, too, angrily left with the in-laws. What happened? Did you really say they were outsiders to Mom? Everyone, having heard only Addison's words, said that to me. Indeed, if only that part of the conversation was considered, it might sound like I was the one being unreasonable. However, I explained the entire situation to everyone. Not a single person blamed me.
Grandma and Grandpa should have been more considerate. Dad's just the same. They've always been like that.
My kids stood by me, but I couldn't forgive those three. Matthew didn't come home for a while. And I didn't contact him. I felt it wasn't right for me to apologize, and I wasn't ready to forgive. However, I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. One day, as I was pondering this, Matthew came home.
Welcome back.
Seeing his face reignited my anger, but I suppressed it and greeted Matthew. Then, Matthew said,
It's been tough, hasn't it?
His awkward attempt at consolation surprised me.
Take the kids on a trip. It'll be a good change of pace.
He handed me travel vouchers. I was speechless. And tears welled up. Maybe the kids had influenced him. But I was happy he went along with it. I immediately contacted my children to plan the trip.
Dad did?
That's unusual. They were surprised by my suggestion. It seemed to be genuinely from Matthew.
I wonder if Dad feels sorry,
I said, smiling. And so, I gratefully accepted the trip offered by Matthew. I'll be going then.
Sure. Take it easy. Why not stay at the kids' places while you're at it?
Really? I can't be away that long.
It's fine. I'll relax at my parents' house, so don't worry about me.
Matthew said this as he saw me off. Amelia was happy to have me visit, so before the trip, I went to Amelia's and then Kenneth's place. Since I hadn't been able to visit them while caring for Mom, I helped them a bit with household chores, like preparing some meals for them to freeze.
Mom, you're not really resting, are you? But it's a big help. Thank you.
Both of them were delighted to have my home-cooked meals. This was all thanks to Matthew's suggestion. Then came the long-awaited trip. I spent a relaxing time with my children at our destination. It seemed to heal the fatigue from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents. Although I was away for almost a week, both children returned to their homes with bright smiles.
It was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while.
Yeah, once in a while. But I wonder if he's up to something? Amelia said this with a joking tone.
Don't say that. Dad thought about it in his own way.
I laughed along with them. I planned to return home and share all these memories with Matthew, looking forward to a happy life together as a couple. But when I arrived home, I was speechless.
What's going on? Where's the house?
I looked around in disbelief, confirming my location. Despite being in a familiar place, my parents' house was gone. Then, Matthew appeared out of nowhere. The in-laws were behind him. They were wearing smug smiles, while I could only stand there.
Matthew, what's happening?
I asked Matthew, bewildered. Matthew, with a similarly unsettling smile as the in-laws, said,
Finally, the nuisance is gone. Now, it's time to live with my parents at my house. What are you talking about?
I replied calmly to Matthew's arrogant statement. Then, Matthew continued.
Have you lost your mind too? Your family home has been demolished. Hurry up and bring your inheritance to my place. Whatever you inherited is ours now.
I realized then. The reason our house was gone was Matthew's doing, and it was all for the inheritance. Despite having thought about the future on my way home, what a betrayal it was. I was overwhelmed with frustration and sadness. But even if they went to the lengths of demolishing the house, they wouldn't get their way. I wouldn't let them. I burst into laughter at the faces of the three, who were still sporting their smug smiles. My laughter seemed to confuse Thomas and Matthew, leaving them looking bewildered.
What? Why are you laughing? What a weird woman. Has she gone crazy?
Addison looked at me as if I were something bizarre. I faced the three of them and said,
You guys don't know?
Know what? I then told Matthew.
I didn't inherit anything at all. So there's no inheritance.
I started laughing again after saying this. They must have mistakenly thought they would become rich from the inheritance. Their baseless assumptions and actions were so ludicrous, I couldn't stop laughing.
What do you mean? Explain yourself.
Matthew demanded an explanation. But I chose to remain silent. I saw no need to enlighten them.
Before that, let me say this. I won't live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it on your own.
Instead of answering Matthew's question and refusing his initial proposal, Addison erupted in anger.
You helped your own parents with their housework, but you can't help us? You do understand there was a reason for that, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? I said it wasn't necessary for us to live together. Have you forgotten that you chose to live together just to avoid housework?
Matthew and Addison bit their lips as I countered their arguments.
And demolishing my family home without permission, there are things you just don't do.
I reprimanded the three of them. And then left the place. Behind me, Matthew called out.
Where are you going?
His voice rang out. But I didn't turn back. I needed to find a place to sleep for the night, and I really didn't want to see Matthew's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. It's not that easy to just demolish a house. The house was still in Mom's name. As I wondered which company had taken on the demolition, an unbelievable truth came to light. Matthew and Thomas had directly demolished the house themselves. Thomas had asked a friend who worked at a demolition heavy machinery, and rented heavy machinery. It was all meticulously planned. Moreover, they had given me the travel vouchers to get rid of me. I felt pathetic for being so easily deceived and was incredibly angry.
Is there any way to punish these three?
I asked the lawyer with tears in my eyes. The lawyer smiled kindly at me.
For demolishing a house in your mother's name without permission, Matthew can be charged with property destruction, and you can claim damages. Let's start there and get Matthew and his parents to properly apologize.
I nodded at the lawyer's words. The lawyer then immediately began the legal process. A few days later, after learning about the situation, an enraged Matthew called me.
What's this legal notice about?
Oh, you received it?
You destroyed an important house, so naturally, you need to compensate. Compensate? We told you we were moving into our family home. We demolished a house nobody was going to live in. Instead of compensation, you should be thanking us. Now, bring whatever inheritance you have and come back home.
Matthew arrogantly retorted.
Thank you for demolishing my house without permission? Don't make me laugh. And as for bringing the inheritance, there's none to bring since I didn't inherit anything.
I shouted back at him over the phone. Matthew remained silent. It seemed he was startled by my raised voice, something unusual for me who rarely shouts. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was precisely this. I had spent a year living with Mom. It was obvious we would have discussed inheritance. I had said to Mom, I don't need anything. Give it all to my brother. So, my brother inherited everything, including the cash and securities. Instead, he had offered me the house, saying he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out. And so, I was supposed to inherit the house.
Either you and Thomas restore the family home to its original state, or pay the amount specified in the notice. This amount! I'm being generous by offering a settlement. If you can't pay, I'll file a complaint and sue you.
I spoke firmly.
Sorry. I didn't expect you to be so angry. Of course I'm angry.
Matthew started making excuses. He had thought that if my family home remained, he couldn't live with his parents. Thomas, in particular, had been hoping to live together for a long time. He took a liking to Kenneth and seemed to want to live with him. It was Matthew who refused to live together at that time, citing the difficulty of commuting, but the in-laws seemed to be under the impression that it was I who was against it, unaware of the real reason. So, they thought demolishing my family home and taking the inheritance would force me to move in with them. However, hearing this now didn't make it any more forgivable.
So, please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. Dad is remorseful too. If you're truly remorseful, then accept the settlement.
I said this and hung up the phone. Matthew kept calling and sending messages, apologizing.
If you're sorry, then just transfer the money quickly.
I pushed Matthew away with these words. I knew the family home couldn't be restored, but demanding compensation was the only way I could process my feelings. Afterward, I stayed at Amelia's house. My brother's family and my children were aware of the situation. Even though my brother must have been angry about the house being demolished without permission.
I won't interfere, but I'll help if you need it. Do what you think is right, Madison,
he said. Everyone condemned Matthew's actions and supported me. A month passed without any payment of the deposit or damages. And there was no contact from Matthew. I couldn't rely on Amelia forever. I wanted to get the money and at least establish a stable living situation. Contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed to me through Amelia's casual remark.
This apron looks like Grandma's, doesn't it?
Amelia said this while showing me her mobile phone screen. Upon seeing the screen, I was taken aback. It was a free market app's product page. The apron that Amelia said resembled my mom's was actually a unique one I had made for her.
How can this be? That is Grandma's apron. I made it, so I'm sure of it. What?
Amelia quickly started checking other pages. The seller seemed to have recently registered, with 0 transaction counts and ratings. There were nearly 30 items listed for sale, and to my shock, all of them belonged to Mom. I immediately realized what was happening. It was Matthew's doing. He was the only one who could have taken Mom's belongings after demolishing the house. I called Matthew right away.
What's with that app?
App? Matthew responded with an air of inconvenience. Fuming, I didn't let him play ignorant.
Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's things, aren't you? Cancel those listings right now.
Then, Matthew seemed to panic.
What? No, it's not me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back.
I hung up and immediately headed to the in-laws' house with Amelia.
Where are Mom's belongings?
As soon as we arrived at the in-laws' house, I called out for Matthew. We were met at the entrance.
I don't know anything about it. Dad, tell the truth.
Amelia backed me up, confronting Matthew. He looked troubled. As we were talking, the in-laws noticed our presence and came out.
Oh, Amelia, you're here?
Addison seemed pleased to see Amelia. But Amelia, visibly angry, confronted her.
Grandma, tell Dad to be honest. Honest about what? It seems Dad is selling Grandma's stuff that was left when she passed away.
At Amelia's words, Addison laughed. Matthew, looking troubled, furrowed his brow and repeated.
It's really not me.
Then, Addison said loudly.
Matthew is selling them? That's impossible. But because I'm the one selling them.
I felt as if the blood had drained from my face at her words. Matthew must have known. He looked at Addison with an expression that screamed trouble. Even as Amelia stood there in shock, Addison seemed cheerful.
What did you say? It's quite a lot of work, you know? I have to pack things carefully and take good photos for the listings.
Addison talked about the app as if it were an enjoyable hobby, seemingly oblivious to the fact she was selling stolen items. Had to restrain myself from lashing out at her.
Cancel the listings. Those items aren't yours to sell.
Amelia, now red-faced and teary, pleaded with Addison. But Addison looked displeased. What's the big deal?
I've found a fun hobby. I use what I can and sell what I can't for a little pocket money. It's good for preventing dementia. Besides, I'm the only grandma left. Amelia, you want me to stay healthy and live a long life, right?
Addison said this without any hint of remorse. Even as we appealed to her to stop, she showed no signs of regret. If talking won't work, then action is the only option. Amelia, let's go.
But
it's fine. Let's leave. I practically dragged Amelia out of the house and went straight to the police station. Although I hadn't intended to report the demolition of the house, theft was a different matter. I explained to the police that Mom's belongings were stolen and being sold. They acted immediately, and the free market app suspended Addison's account. At least now, no more items could be sold. On the way back from the police station, I called Matthew.
I had Addison's account suspended.
You knew about this, right? That makes you complicit.
No, I've filed a report with the police. I expect you to cooperate with the investigation.
Matthew became frantic at my words.
But we're family. Please withdraw it. Family? You still haven't paid for the damage you caused to my house, and I don't see any signs of remorse.
Matthew was troubled by my angry retort. However, I wasn't heartless. Despite everything with the in-laws, there was a history with Matthew that couldn't be ignored. Sighing, I said,
I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. Also, Thomas looked quite ill. Has he been to the hospital? What? I'm not a monster. Just make sure he gets that message.
I said, and hung up the phone. I saw Thomas for the first time in a while. He barely spoke and looked significantly thinner than just a few months ago. His complexion was beyond pale, almost ashen. It was clear he wasn't healthy. But that family seemed oblivious. Addison focused on selling stolen goods and Matthew only putting on a brave face for me. They lacked basic empathy. The next day, Thomas called me. I expected gratitude but got the opposite.
Why are you treating me like a sick person? Planning to shove me in a hospital to get rid of me? I have to protect Addison and Matthew from you. I won't go to the hospital.
He was scolding me. Here I was, concerned about him, and this was his response.
I apologize if I overstepped. I was just worried. I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Don't insult me.
His words irritated me, but a few days later, he apparently felt unwell enough to visit the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Matthew, in a panic, called me.
Dad's got terminal cancer. What am I going to do?
But I just snorted in response.
I don't want to hear it. Do you know what he said when I suggested going to the hospital? I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents.
Do as you please.
How can you be so heartless, Madison?
Who's the heartless one?
Did you ever say a kind word to my mom when she was sick? Reflect on your own actions.
I said this and hung up the phone. As expected, Thomas soon passed away. I didn't want to hold negative feelings towards someone who passed away, but I couldn't muster any tears for him, remembering all he had done and said. After his funeral, his will was discovered. The man who insisted he wasn't short-lived had everything meticulously planned.
The house goes to my grandson, Kenneth. The rest of the estate is to be split between my wife and eldest son.
I was surprised to hear Kenneth's name. Thomas had always favored Kenneth and wanted to live with him. Perhaps he hoped Kenneth would live in the house after he was gone. To Kenneth, this might have been an inconvenience.
You should renounce the inheritance.
You don't need that house. I advised Kenneth, but he was happy to receive it. The inheritance tax was a burden, and there seemed to be no benefit for Kenneth. However, he was pleased, so I decided not to interfere further. Kenneth inherited the house as per Thomas's will. Addison seemed pleased and paid the inheritance tax.
He's our heir, after all. It's only natural,
she said. Well, that's not incorrect. I was a bit downcast, feeling like I had lost Kenneth, but then something unbelievable happened.
Come to our place.
I received this message from Matthew and immediately went to the in-laws' house. There, like me once, stood Addison and Matthew, stunned in front of the house. In front of me, on the grounds of the in-laws' house, there was a truck with Matthew's name on it, along with employees. And there, right before my eyes, the in-laws' house was being demolished.
What's happening? It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right?
Kenneth, appearing out of nowhere, watched the demolition of the family home with satisfaction.
Kenneth, what are you doing? Stop this right now. Even if I stop them now, it's not like anyone can live here anymore. Kenneth, what have you done?
Addison and Matthew pleaded with Kenneth. But he just laughed.
Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Kenneth. Grandma, did you apologize for what you did to Mom?
Kenneth's smile vanished, replaced by a piercing glare at Addison and Matthew. The two of them sank to their knees. The heavy machinery continued to noisily dismantle the in-laws' house. I finally felt a sense of relief. Later, Matthew finally paid the damages and the security deposit using the inherited assets. It turned out Kenneth had recovered the items Addison stole from Mom, and they were safely returned to me.
Mom, you have me and Amelia.
Don't worry. I shed tears of relief at his words. Addison and Matthew, having lost their home and with no money left, were now back in company housing. Matthew and I left the company housing. And now, returning to it with his mother, they've become the talk of the town. People are wondering what happened. I received such a message from the wife of a colleague of Matthew, who I'm on good terms with. So, I decided to tell her the whole truth, without any deception. The two of them will probably feel awkward from now on, but it's their own responsibility. Furthermore, after Matthew's resignation, the two, having lost their place to live, are now forced to economize in preparation for their new home. Occasionally, I'm considering asking my friends about how the two are faring, just for some conversation. Meanwhile, I continued to stay at Amelia's house, but then Kenneth decided to get married. He plans to build a new home. The land where the in-laws' house stood sold for a good price, which was unexpectedly beneficial.
Mom, come live with us.
Furthermore, Kenneth said that to me. His wife-to-be expressed her warm welcome to the idea, which I found very heartening. Since I couldn't stay with Amelia forever, I gratefully accepted his offer. Determined not to end up like Addison, I look forward to living happily with my new family.
Hey, what are you doing sleeping here? You're not seriously going to make me bring this, are you?
Looking over, I found my stepson Zach pointing at the lunch on the table. Zach, who's always particular about his food, checks the contents of the sandwich inside the lunchbox and which snack is packed with the sandwich. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got a fever of 104 degrees. I've been tormented by a high fever since this morning but I stood up, reaching to put the sandwich in the lunchbox. However, Zach roughly brushed the sandwich aside with his hand.
Hey, why would you do that?
Though I was suffering from the fever, I raised my voice. Then, Zach's face suddenly flushed with anger and started to tremble. He grabbed the vase from the table and threw it at me with all his might.
Your dad's parasite, don't you dare slack off at home.
As Zach, my husband Ashton's son from his previous marriage, grew up, his attitude towards me worsened. But this was the first time he went this far. I staggered but managed to dodge the vase thrown by Zach. He must have been really upset to be scolded by me. I can't forgive him, but I'm too sick to deal with Zach right now. I feel like I could collapse at any moment because I'm feeling so unwell.
Enough is enough.
Suddenly, I hear a shout from behind me. It's unmistakably Ashton's voice, and I thought the scolding was directed at me. I had told Ashton about feeling unwell last night. It's too much, just because lunch was only a simple sandwich. When I timidly turn around, there stood Ashton. Looking furious like never before, his shoulders shaking with anger. At Ashton's feet lay the shattered pieces of the vase thrown by Zach, wetting the floor. Zach looks at me with a serves you right expression upon Ashton's entrance. Just as Zach starts to smirk and opens his mouth, an unexpected word comes out of Ashton's mouth. My name is Tracy. I'm a 49-year-old housewife. I married my current husband Ashton when I was 42. It was my first marriage, but for Ashton, this was his second. I met Ashton at my previous job. I was doing clerical work at the company, and Ashton, who frequently visited as a salesman, became an acquaintance. I've always been shy around people, but as I talked with Ashton, who was serious and honest, I was drawn to his character. Ashton had a son from his previous marriage. I was surprised when I learned that such a serious person had been married before. Could it be that even for someone like him, a marriage could fail? That's what I initially thought, but after hearing the details from Ashton, I felt sympathy. Ashton's ex-wife was quite the partier, and the divorce was caused by her infidelity. Even though he knew about her bad habits during their relationship, Ashton believed they would change. However, no matter how hard Ashton tried, the outcome didn't change. Despite saying I won't do it again, his ex-wife cheated repeatedly. Even after their son was born, her bad habits didn't stop, and Ashton finally decided to divorce. He couldn't leave his son with such a mother, a tough decision indeed. Ashton dearly loved the son he had with his ex-wife, who he used to be deeply in love with. The son's name is Zach, and he's now 21 years old, attending college. Though there's no blood relation between me and him, he became my son when I married Ashton. I had been introduced to Zach several times during our dating period. The first time I met Zach, he was 10 years old. Since it was a very sensitive issue, Ashton and I took our time to talk to Zach about it. No matter how much we loved each other, if Zach rejected us, that would be it. Being a primary school student, it was difficult for him to understand everything. To be honest, it didn't seem like it was such an important matter to Zach. Without any rejection, Zach became my son. However, once we started living together, Zach's troubles became apparent. Ashton is a businessman working in sales at a major insurance company. He's serious by nature and has been raising Zach alone since his divorce from his ex-wife. While raising a child, he also managed to do his job well at the company, eventually becoming an executive. Ashton worked hard for Zach's sake, ensuring that Zach could live a life without experiencing any misfortune. But raising a child alone has its limits, even for a father. After work, it often got late, or I ended up leaving Zach alone. Though my parents-in-law live not too far away, Ashton, being the serious type, didn't like relying too much on them. That inevitably led to him being overly indulgent with Zach. He compensated for not being able to spend much time with him by buying him various things and spoiling him. Seeing this, Zach grew cunning. He knew that by acting good in front of Dad, he could get anything he wanted. He became increasingly adept at committing misdeeds without the adults around him noticing. That was precisely how he was acting when I first met Ashton. For Zach, my presence was nothing but an annoyance. He probably thought that having a new mother figure would take away his freedom. Yet, he didn't oppose our marriage because he saw me as an outlet for his stress. Even as a child, he exploited my delicate position. Before we were married, I was a guest, and Ashton prioritized me. But once married, we were family. Zach understood this too well, knowing that Ashton would put his blood-related son first. Whose words would Ashton believe first, mine or Zach's? Once the three of us started living together, Zach's attitude towards me changed drastically, and the harassment began. I was prepared for some rebellion from a boy in elementary school, but since Dad's feeding you, it's only natural you take care of me, right? What I say goes, so get used to it. The first time Zach said such abusive words to me, I was furious. Those aren't words a child should say to a parent, and it shouldn't be allowed.
Zach, do you understand what you just said? Even if it was a joke, there are things you shouldn't say. Think about why Mom is angry.
Zach listened to my words with a smirking face. Rather, he seemed to enjoy being scolded. It was eerie to see Zach smirking through my serious scolding. He understood his position as a stepson and how we might be seen by society. Having had little to do with children before, I was appalled by how cunning he was. I never imagined a child could say such things. That night, when Ashton came home, I told him about the incident with Zach. The unnaturally mature behavior, the abusive words towards me. I was nearly in a panic, but made sure to convey everything to Ashton. However, contrary to my feelings, Ashton's thoughts were exactly as Zach predicted.
Zach said that to you?
No way.
Aren't you exaggerating a bit? Zach isn't the kind of child to say such things.
Ashton didn't take my report seriously and refused to believe Zach's abusive words. No matter how much I insisted, Ashton's reaction didn't change. On the contrary, he was irritated by my persistence. Tracy just doesn't like Zach because he's not her real son, he implied without saying it outright, but it was apparent in his actions.
Let's drop this subject. You used to care so much about Zach before we got married. I'm disappointed in you.
Ashton said that inside deeply. I didn't want to hear such words from Ashton. Despite everything, I was seriously engaging with Zach. I no longer thought of him as someone else's child. But from Ashton's perspective, it seemed I was seen that way. Ashton's words crushed me. Saying any more would only worsen our relationship. I felt that and gave up on discussing about Zach any further. Zach, who had been watching secretly, grew confident from the situation. Dad really does believe in me, he concluded with deep conviction. Still, there were times when my patience ran out. If this continued, Zach would grow up to be a terrible adult. I was afraid of ruining my relationship with Ashton, but each time I scolded Zach and consulted Ashton. However, the result was always the same. I even directly asked Zach several times, but he dismissed it.
I would never say such a thing to Mom, right? It must be a misunderstanding or you misheard. Maybe Mom just feels that I'm in the way.
Zach exploited my position, using it to wedge himself into Ashton's affections. If things continue this way, Zach will keep having his way, and eventually, irreversible cracks will form in my relationship with Ashton. The parental instinct to do what's best for Zach started to be suppressed deep down. I tried to refrain from interfering in Zach's actions as much as possible, and even kept my emotions in check. I didn't want to resort to such thinking, but Zach would eventually leave this home, and I just had to endure until then. Perhaps, in time, his feelings towards me would change, and he might even apologize. In my daily interactions with Zach, I knew the likelihood of that happening was almost nil. However, I had no choice but to keep encouraging myself. And so, I continued to deceive myself, desperately enduring each day. It was around the time Zach was about to graduate from high school. Having been tutored by a top-notch instructor, Zach had secured admission to one of the most competitive universities in the state. Perhaps feeling relieved after securing his admission, he started to act even more arrogantly than before. That day, Ashton was away on a business trip that lasted several days, leaving the house empty. In the evening, after finishing the chores, I waited for Zach's return. With Ashton not around, we were supposed to have dinner together, so I prepared a proper menu as usual. However, Zach didn't return even after his usual time had passed. I hadn't heard anything, but maybe he was delayed by a class or something. Could something have happened? I sent a message to Zach's mobile phone, but there was no reply from him. Even past 8 p.m., with no contact from Zach, I didn't start dinner, waiting for him to return. About an hour later, I heard a noisy group outside the house. Feeling a bad premonition, I opened the front door, and there stood Zach, bringing along several boys and girls.
What? You're home? We're gonna have a party now, so can you leave?
Upon seeing my face, Zach clicked his tongue and said that. From behind, jeers like "When is it gonna start?" and "Hurry up" followed.
Leave! I was making dinner, waiting for you to come home.
I threw back at Zach, bewildered. It was unthinkable to allow a party with many university students at this hour.
Like I care! This is my house, so just get out of the way!
Zach yelled, pushing past me to enter the house. Following him, the group of boys and girls also started pouring into the house. Powerless, I could only watch the procession. Soon after, loud music began to play inside. And the students' clamor reached my ears. This would surely disturb the neighbors. I rushed through the students towards Zach, covering my ears.
Turn off the music now!
I shouted, trying not to be drowned out by the music. However, Zach deliberately ignored me, pretending not to hear. Overwhelmed by the students' fervor, I was helpless. I'm not sure how long it had been, but the sound of sirens began to mix with the loud music. Predictably, the sirens belonged to police officers, called by a neighbor's report. As the guardian, I received a stern warning, and Zach and his friends were ordered to disperse. I was just embarrassed and sorry for causing such a nuisance over something so trivial. While Zach had been meek in front of the officers, he started complaining to me once everyone had left.
Who called the cops? Seriously, so annoying.
The next day, when Ashton returned from his trip, I reported the incident and asked him to talk to Zach.
You're not a child anymore. Act with the awareness of an adult and live without shame.
Zach apologized to me sincerely after being lectured by Ashton. Later, Zach and Ashton went to apologize to the neighbors together. After receiving a good scolding from the neighbors, Zach returned home with tears in his eyes, seemingly having learned his lesson. I thought Zach had truly reflected and changed, but my hopes were soon dashed. One night, sometime after Zach started university, I was suddenly hit by a chill and measured my temperature with the thermometer. I had a slight fever. Although I had no symptoms of a cold, my body felt sluggish and my head wasn't clear. I told Ashton I would go to bed early, just to be safe, and went to sleep. The next morning, the alarm clock went off at 5 a.m. as usual so I could prepare Zach's lunch. Upon waking, I was hit by a severe headache, barely able to lift myself up. Somehow managing to get out of bed, I checked my temperature. 104 degrees, this was definitely bad. However, I felt I still had to prepare Zach's lunch. Clinging to tables and walls, I barely made it to the kitchen. In this condition, it was impossible to cook properly. Normally, I make everything from scratch, including sandwiches along with homemade scones and muffins. I usually pack some fruits as well. But today, I decided to just make a simple sandwich with some vegetables to keep the nutritional balance in mind. Despite the high fever, I desperately finished making Zach's lunch. Maybe it was the relief of finishing the lunch, but I fell asleep for a moment in the dining chair, only to be awakened by Zach's voice.
Hey, what are you doing sleeping here? You're not seriously going to make me bring this, are you?
Looking up, Zach was pointing at the sandwich on the table. Zach, who's always particular about his food, checks the contents of the sandwich inside the lunchbox and which snack is packed with the sandwich.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got a fever of 104 degrees.
I stood up, reaching to put the sandwich into the lunchbox. However, Zach roughly brushed off the sandwich on the table aside with his hand.
Hey, why would you do that?
Even with the fever, I raised my voice. Then, Zach's face suddenly turned red, and his body began to shake with anger. He grabbed a vase from the table and threw it at me with all his might.
Don't slack off on housework. You're nothing but Dad's parasite.
I staggered but managed to dodge the vase thrown by Zach. He must have been really upset to be scolded by me. I can't forgive him, but I'm too ill to deal with Zach right now. I feel like I could collapse at any moment because I'm feeling so unwell.
Enough is enough!
Suddenly, I hear a shout from behind me. It was undoubtedly Ashton's voice, and I thought the scolding was directed at me. I had told Ashton I was feeling unwell last night. This is too much, just because I made a simple lunch. When I timidly turned around, there stood Ashton. Looking furious like never before, his shoulders shaking with anger. At Ashton's feet lay the shattered pieces of the vase thrown by Zach, wetting the floor. Zach looked at me with a serves you right expression upon Ashton's entrance. Just as Zach starts to smirk and opens his mouth, Ashton shouted again.
Zach, I'm talking about you!
Zach stopped in his tracks at Ashton's angry voice, unable to comprehend Ashton's reprimand.
Huh? What are you talking about? Dad!
Zach was visibly shaken, his body trembling. Looking as if he might cry, staggering towards me.
You have a fever. Tracy, you should be resting.
Ashton, still glaring at Zach, approached me and told me so. Unable to grasp the situation, I too stood frozen, unable to move. Then, Ashton gently placed his hand on my shoulder.
Just leave this to me.
I cautiously looked up at Ashton's face and slowly nodded. There was no sign of resentment or anger in his gaze. If anything, his eyes conveyed regret and apology. Supported by Ashton, I managed to sit down on a nearby chair. While I sat down with Ashton's help, Zach, unable to hide his disturbance, was mouthing words as if wanting to say something.
Thank you.
After seating me, Ashton began to ignore Zach and started cleaning up the broken vase pieces scattered on the floor. After gathering the shards, he carefully wiped the wet floor and picked up the flowers that were miserably scattered around. The flowers I had bought had their petals scattered from being thrown. Ashton carefully placed a few flowers into a cup filled with water. During this time, Zach was so overwhelmed by the somber atmosphere that he couldn't say anything. He seemed to understand what was coming next. As Ashton turned back to face Zach, his eyes were again filled with fierce anger.
You're no longer a child of this house. Do you understand what you've done to Mom?
Ashton muttered sternly while glaring at Zach. The kitchen fell silent, with Ashton's heavy words echoing.
Wait, Dad, what are you talking about? Stop with the bad jokes. They're not funny.
Sensing Ashton's intention, Zach, though panicking, tried to respond jokingly.
Pack your things and leave immediately.
Ignoring Zach's remarks, Ashton said this quietly before placing his hand on my shoulder in shock.
Come on, lie down in bed.
I nodded silently and then went to the bedroom with Ashton's support. As I lay down, Ashton covered me with a blanket.
I'm sorry for everything up to now. I sensed he was looking down on you, but I never imagined he was acting like that behind my back. Tracy, you kept quiet for his sake, didn't you?
Ashton's voice trembled as he repeated "I'm sorry" several times.
After you rest a bit, we'll go to the hospital.
Ashton was visibly shaken and disturbed, but after a while, he said this and left the room. The kind words from Ashton, whom I thought would blame me, filled my heart. It wasn't just Zach he loved, he had been loving me properly as well. Ashton was struggling in his own way, watching over me. Despite the severe fever making my body ache, the pain was forgotten as a glimmer of hope started to shine in my heart. After Ashton took me to the hospital, the diagnosis was a high fever due to overwork. I was told to rest easy for a while, and then I started recuperating at home. When we returned home, Zach was still walking around with a big bag, seemingly in disbelief. He continued packing while watching Ashton, but Ashton didn't even look at Zach. After a while, Zach seemed to give up and left the house. He had become a university student. He could take care of himself, but I never imagined it would come to this. Zach will probably seek refuge with his grandparents or friends and return home once things settled down. Ashton's anger was way past normal. However, he wouldn't abandon his beloved son. I had naively thought so, but Ashton's resolution was far firmer than I imagined. As expected, Zach fled to his grandparents' house. He lied to his grandparents, saying Mom kicked me out, and managed to win their sympathy.
Oh my! How terrible! I'll talk to Dad myself, so tell me everything that happened.
Zach, thrilled at deceiving his grandparents, planned to use this opportunity to frame me. He started claiming that he had been receiving terrible harassment from me, who was not his real mother, all along. He fabricated a story about throwing the vase in a panic to protect himself during this incident. Dad is misunderstanding, he pleaded with tears, winning his grandparents over to his side.
Poor thing! You can skip university today and just rest. Don't worry about Mom, I'll handle her properly.
Zach, satisfied that his plan was working, proudly snuggled into the prepared bed.
I'll play the role of a grandson who can't recover from the shock.
Zach believed this without a doubt. However, Zach was about to face a far worse hell. The next day, Zach wore a smug face as he left for the university, while his grandparents sent him off. He thought this might be his chance to get rid of me, the nuisance. He had been using everyone to his advantage so far, thinking it was about time. Everything seemed to be going according to his plans, but as the lecture started, his belief crumbled with a noise.
Zach, I received a notice of withdrawal from the university by your dad yesterday.
The instructor, recognizing Zach, said this with a troubled look. The room started buzzing at those words.
What? What do you mean? That can't be right. Must be some mistake.
With Zach's desperate plea, the instructor said he would check and left the classroom. Zach tried to respond confidently to the gazes from around him.
Don't worry, it's gonna be fine. The teacher must have confused me with someone else. Making a fuss over nothing.
Yet, a bad premonition ran through Zach's mind. No way, he wouldn't go that far. When the instructor returned, he told Zach straightforward.
There's no mistake. Zach, your withdrawal has been processed.
With the instructor's words, the room buzzed even more, and Zach was engulfed in despair. Filled with embarrassment, Zach's face turned red, and he dashed out of the classroom.
This can't be happening. What's going on?
Racing down the long corridor, Zach muttered complaints under his breath. Why dominated his thoughts, slipping out unintentionally. He pulled out his mobile phone to call Ashton. However, Ashton had blocked his calls, leaving Zach unable to connect. Panicked, Zach hurried towards his grandparents' house. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the sight of his bag thrown in front of the entrance.
What is this?
Zach's panic intensified as he rang the doorbell. Seeing no response, he desperately banged on the front door.
Grandma! Grandpa!
He pleaded with tears in his voice, but there was no answer from inside. In that moment, Zach realized. He had been betrayed by his grandparents. With nowhere else to go, Zach grabbed his discarded bag and headed home. Hoping for some mistake, but the reality of the situation was clear. Sobbing, Zach rang the doorbell upon his return, and I was there to greet him.
What's happening? I was wrong. Please help me.
I led in Zach, who was sobbing. And he continued to cry even louder, perhaps feeling relieved. As planned, I took Zach to the room where Ashton was waiting. Zach remained inconsolable in front of Ashton, who watched silently, waiting for the crying to stop. Eventually realizing this, Zach ceased his tears. Once Zach had stopped, Ashton, still stern, finally spoke.
What do you intend to do by coming here now?
With those words, Zach was filled with despair again. He wasn't forgiven. There was no return to this home.
You should know, Grandma and Grandpa won't let you in anymore either.
I said, adding insult to injury. The plan had always been to welcome Zach if he fled to them, then to turn him away. This shock was greater than an outright rejection. It was retaliation for Zach, who had pretended to repent but betrayed my trust. He was to experience firsthand what I had endured.
There's no plan to revoke your university expulsion. If you want to continue, figure out the tuition yourself.
The expulsion was Ashton's decision, not something I had considered. It was to ensure Zach faced the consequences of his actions.
Before marrying Tracy, I might have made you feel neglected. That's why I prioritized you over her. You were always good in front of me, and I believed you were repentant for your mistakes.
Despite knowing better, Ashton had indulged Zach excessively. feeling sorry for him losing his mother and trying to compensate. But Zach's continuous disrespect and the vase-throwing incident were the last straw for Ashton. In a way, Ashton blamed his own upbringing for Zach's repulsive character. Unable to forgive the years of suffering Zach had caused me, Ashton had no choice but to believe in the harsh reality. Taking everything from Zach and casting him aside was also a punishment for Ashton himself.
So, I can't get help from you anymore? I can't make it on my own.
Zach pleaded tearfully, but Ashton's mind was made up. As a small mercy, Ashton handed Zach a month's worth of living expenses. In this limited time, Zach had no choice but to fend for himself. For Zach, who had been coddled and used to getting his way, this was hell. Being expelled from university meant he was off the promised elite path. Cut off from his parents and grandparents, he had to navigate life alone. The grandparents had always doted on Zach, their grandson. But after Ashton revealed Zach's numerous transgressions against me, their perspective shifted. No matter how beloved, some actions are unforgivable. At first, the word disownment seemed to baffle them a bit. But with Ashton's firm resolve and considering Zach's own situation, they cooperated. That very day, Zach rented a room in an old, dingy apartment where he could afford with the little money he had. The bath and toilet were shared, and the room was covered with thin, grimy walls. If he ever made noise with a large group of friends like before, he would be kicked out immediately. Staring at the little money he had left, Zach shed tears. He had lost his home and his family. His friends, who had always enjoyed Zach's generosity, were gone, having only used him. Zach, always unreasonable and lacking common sense, had kept his friends around with money. Now without any support, his future was bleak. He had never worked part-time before, relying on his parents for all his social expenses. Could someone as spoiled as him even manage to work? To survive, he had to find even the most grueling jobs. Thinking about this, Zach couldn't stop the tears from flowing. A year had passed since Zach left our home. Ashton started to put me first again, like when we first met. For about 10 years, everything had revolved around Zach, so we were reclaiming our relationship. I no longer had to ponder over Zach, allowing me to purely enjoy my relationship with Ashton. I'm truly sorry for all the hardship I've caused. I became blinded by my love for my son. I had never voiced it, but whenever Ashton criticized my statements about Zach, I would become physically ill from the stress. Being attacked on the point of having no blood relation felt like exploiting a vulnerability. Legally, he was my son, but that was one aspect I couldn't change. I felt devastated, as if being targeted for an unavoidable weakness. Now, Ashton and I can talk about it because Ashton himself always had this sensitive issue in the back of his mind. Not in a bad way, but he had decided never to mention it to me. Knowing how much it troubled me, Ashton began apologizing whenever possible. Zach's departure seemed to have freed us from various entanglements. Whether he knew it or not, Zach started sending letters periodically. They weren't about wanting to mend our relationship, but rather updating us on his situation. Perhaps it was his way of apologizing. Since that day, he has been desperately looking for work, sustaining his days through manual labor. Although Ashton says nothing, he seems somewhat relieved by these letters. We won't reach out anymore, but it's eased our minds. It's difficult for us to have children at our age, but it seems we can live harmoniously as a couple. There were more hardships than happiness, making everyday survival a challenge. But now, I can walk through my life, a bright and joyful one. Ah, feels so refreshing. Revived. Ensley, my sister-in-law, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, came over to our place and sprawled out on the air-conditioned living room sofa, as usual. My daughter Mirinda, who was doing her homework, frowned in annoyance.
Let's see. Haven't finished your summer project yet, have you?
Ensley peered over at the summer plan. I remember those days. With summer projects, you never really know what to do, right? In that regard, Mirinda, I'm kinda envious of you.
What do you mean?
Mirinda asked, puzzled.
Well, not many kids are born with such an interesting face like you. How about you compile something about that challenge of yours? LOL. It'd be easy, right?
Mirinda was born with a rare condition called cleft lip and palate, which resulted in splits in her upper lip and palate. She had undergone numerous surgeries over the years, but more than anything, it was the stares from others that hurt her the most. The condition made her face asymmetrical from her mouth to her nose, and the ignorant stares were painfully sharp. Why am I the only one like this? Mirinda had tearfully asked before. I couldn't stay silent at Ensley's incredibly insensitive remark.
Ensley. Even if we're family, there are things you should and shouldn't say. I was just stating the facts. If she compiles something about her interesting condition, everyone will be pleased, won't they?
Ensley is laughing, saying Mirinda's condition is interesting. Without knowing how much pain and struggle Mirinda and we have gone through.
Don't worry about what she says, Mirinda.
I grabbed Ensley's arm, ready to forcefully drag her out of the house. That's when Mirinda stood up slowly, smiling, and said,
Don't worry, Mom, I've decided.
My name is Eleanor. I live with my elementary school-aged daughter Mirinda. My husband Dennis is a good husband and father, but he's away on work assignment.
I'm home, Mom. I'll go wash my hands, then I'll help with chopping the vegetables.
Saying this, Mirinda took off her mask. Nowadays, everyone wears masks when going out due to the pandemic. But Mirinda has been wearing a mask in front of anyone other than family since she was young. She must still feel resistance to showing her bare face. Mirinda was born with a condition called cleft lip and palate, which is not commonly known. It's a congenital condition where the upper lip and palate are split, occurring in about 1 in 1,000 births in the United States. Seeing our child for the first time, my husband and I were shocked but also vowed to protect her no matter what. Cleft lip and palate requires several surgeries, and Mirinda's first surgery was just 2 months after she was born. Though the surgery closed her mouth, it didn't completely correct the distortion in her mouth and nose. Most people don't know much about this condition, which made me worried about how Mirinda would be perceived as she grew up. There would surely be times when Mirinda would get hurt. Still, Dennis and I discussed letting Mirinda live like any other child, attending school and going to amusement parks just like her peers. The days of hospital visits must have been painful for young Mirinda, who usually doesn't complain much. Mirinda would become anxious before surgery, saying, "Mom." There must have been unspeakable anxiety clinging to her. She wouldn't let go of my hand until she fell asleep. As an elementary student, Mirinda would come home and share various school events with laughter.
Today, Gerald in my class mimicked the teacher, and it was so funny. During lunch, we played rock, paper, scissors to see who gets the dessert of the kid who was absent, and Caitlin won. Over the last long weekend, Tyrone from the next class went on a vacation with his family. But their dad got lost while driving, and it was a huge mess.
Mirinda would tell fun stories at dinner every day, but I noticed something off. None of the stories Mirinda told included herself. Mirinda always just tells me about things others have said or done. She never mentions doing anything with a friend herself. Despite a bad feeling, I lacked the courage to directly ask her about it. One day in 2nd grade, Mirinda came home crying.
What's wrong? What happened?
Seeing Mirinda cry, except before surgeries, surprised me. Miranda was silent, looking frustrated, but then she couldn't hold back anymore and started crying louder. It's okay, you can cry all you want. I hugged my daughter tightly. After calming down, Miranda said, "You know, Mom," and shared feelings she had kept to herself. Even though Miranda wears a mask to school to hide her mouth and nose's distortions, she has to remove it during lunchtime. The first time they ate together, a boy sitting across from her pointed and laughed, saying, "Your face looks weird." That started it, and other kids gathered around, saying, "Really? That's funny," expressing their thoughts aloud. The teacher quickly scolded everyone, "Back to your seats," settling the situation. But from that day, Miranda felt ostracized, unable to join any friend's circle. She had been enduring this for over a year. "Why did you keep silent until now?" "Because, Mom and Dad, you always have it tough because of my condition, right? Surgeries cost a lot of money, and you have to go back and forth between the hospital and home for me. Miranda, for US." Knowing Miranda was considerate of us made me feel inadequate as a parent. Why am I the only one like this? Tears fell again from Miranda's eyes after she finished speaking. "I'm sorry, Miranda. Despite being blameless, she's had a hard time at school. Not just school. Miranda might continue to be seen strangely by others because of her condition. I blamed myself, feeling responsible for her suffering." "I'm sorry, Miranda. From now on, Mom promises to be by your side as much as possible to protect you. Even for busy Dad at work, I'll be with you." I hugged Miranda again tightly. When I told Dennis after he came home, "It's hard not being there when you're going through tough times. I've let you handle all the hardship alone," Dennis also blamed himself. "It can't be helped. I'll protect Miranda's heart, and you protect our livelihood. Let's protect Miranda together." Yes, we should. We vowed again to protect our daughter. From that day, I quit my job at the apparel company and became a housewife. In 3rd grade, Miranda underwent her 4th surgery. While the first 3 surgeries were minor corrections, the 4th involved transplanting bone from her pelvis to her upper jaw. It was more extensive than before, but it made the distortion from her mouth to her nose less noticeable, making her look no different from other children. However, having bone removed from her pelvis made walking difficult for Miranda, forcing her into a wheelchair for a while. Still, Miranda would look at her face in the hand mirror and ask with a bright, radiant smile never seen before, "Hey, Mom. Do I look prettier now?" Seeing my daughter happy and smiling without feeling self-conscious made me happy too. "Yes, you're very pretty, Miranda." I brushed her hair and spoke to her. After a while, Miranda began serious walking rehabilitation. She almost fell during the unfamiliar rehab, but when I tried to help, "Just watch, Mom," she scolded me. Holding onto the handrail, Miranda grimaced with each step, "This is nothing. My face looks proper pretty now." Lucky, right, never showing any signs of weakness. "Does it hurt? Are you okay?" I couldn't help but worry and wanted to support her physically. "If you always support me, Mom, there's no point in rehab." Miranda laughed shyly. As a result of her positive attitude towards rehab, the pain in her hips completely vanished, and she could walk on her own without needing crutches anymore. 2 years later, Miranda was in 5th grade. There were still scars on her lips, but they were hardly noticeable and less mentioned. It seems Miranda has grown to like looking at her face in the mirror. Upon waking up, she heads straight to the bathroom and faces herself in the mirror with a smile. She used to dislike even approaching a mirror. The memory of those times feels like a distant past, making me chuckle to myself. "I wish I could see Dad," Miranda sighed. Dennis has been on a work assignment far away. We sometimes communicate via video calls, but it's not the same as having him nearby.
Sherry said her family is going on an overseas trip.
Frederick is going camping. Everyone seems so lucky. Despite it being summer vacation, Miranda lamented not being able to go anywhere due to our circumstances. One day, while we were spending a holiday at home, the doorbell suddenly rang. "I'll get it." Miranda stopped her summer homework in the living room and headed to the entrance, as I was busy with household chores and couldn't leave them.
"What, Aunt again? You came back?"
I could hear Miranda's displeased voice.
"How rude! You came back? I'm your aunt, after all. Family can visit as many times as they want, right?"
Saying so, the visitor entered the house without waiting for Miranda's consent.
It's cool here. Revived."
I poked my head out from the balcony and welcomed the guest half-heartedly. "Welcome, Ensley." The guest was Ensley, Dennis's sister. According to Dennis, after graduating from high school, Ensley worked as an office clerk at a small trading company but ended up quitting within 3 months after being reprimanded by a senior for taking too many days off and getting into a heated argument. Now, she's living back at home.
Dad told me she doesn't even bother to look at job ads he shows her. Just throws them on the floor and spends all day playing video games.
Dennis complained about Ensley's lack of motivation. Ensley just sat down on the sofa as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As Miranda tried to return to her homework, Ensley, fanning her sweaty shirt front to catch some air, exclaimed, "It's so hot. This weather is absolutely crazy." Ensley loudly exclaimed, disregarding Miranda, who was trying to study. When Miranda frowned in annoyance, Ensley did not miss it. "Am I bothering you, niece?" she asked with a creepy smile, intentionally disturbing Miranda. Miranda just sighed without engaging, knowing from experience that arguing would only encourage Ensley to be more annoying.
"Miranda, I'd like something cold. Auntie's thirsty,"
Ensley said in a cloying voice and hugged Miranda. "Please stay away, it's hot." Miranda pushed Ensley away with a calm voice as she tried to lean on her, and Ensley clicked her tongue.
"What's with you? No charm at all. Eleanor, don't you have something to drink?"
I took out coffee from the fridge, poured it into a cup, and handed it to Ensley.
"Could you keep it down a bit? Miranda is studying."
I admonished Ensley in a low voice, though I knew it was futile.
"You know, I always wonder."
Ensley looked around the room and poked Miranda's cheek with her finger, asking, "Why doesn't Miranda study in her own room?" Seeing Miranda swat her hand away, Ensley laughed as if amused.
"To save on electricity,"
Miranda answered irritably.
"Saving on electricity? So that's why you're scrimping? Mom isn't working, right? That's why you guys are poor."
Miranda slammed her hand on the table in frustration.
"Don't compare me to someone who doesn't work despite being old enough." "Are you talking about me?" "Wow, Miranda, that's harsh. Your mom doesn't work outside either. Always lazing around at home just like me, right?" "That's not true. Mom is busy being a housewife. She's always cooking, cleaning, doing laundry. There's a lot to do. She's not lazy like Aunt."
Miranda retorted with a firm stance.
"Really? Even Miranda is being cold to me? Listen, my parents are like, if you want to use the air conditioner so much, pay the high electricity bill yourself. Can you believe that? Living with family and they say that? It's your own fault for not working and just lazing around and playing in your room all the time." "Well, it's not like I can pay for that. Going to cafes costs money, department stores are far and a hassle. So in the end, the only place I can rely on is Miranda's house.
Despite Miranda's reluctance, Ensley hugged her again. This is how Ensley would come over unannounced, trampling over our lives every time. Even though she's Dennis's sister, I couldn't bring myself to forcefully kick her out. When I consult Dennis, who's away on his own, he says, kick her out immediately. If it comes to it, calling the police is fine. But she's still family, and I couldn't bring myself to do that. Taking advantage of my inability to stand firm, Ensley has been getting increasingly bold lately.
Anyway, Eleanor, you got it easy, right? Because you can just play around at home every day.
I'm not taking it easy at all. I snapped back at Ensley, irritated. After engaging more than I should have, I calmed down and realized I shouldn't have. Predictably, Ensley got even more encouraged. It's fine to slack off, right? Just buy whatever you like from the grocery store for meals, and for cleaning, just quickly tidy up the places that catch the eye. That's what I would do, LOL. She suggested I take shortcuts in my role as a housewife.
Don't compare me with Aunt. Besides, it's annoying because of her I can't concentrate on my studies. Can you just go home?
Miranda protested strongly. Oh, scary. Ensley exaggeratedly shivered.
So, Miranda, what have you been studying? Should I help you? I might be able to teach you addition or subtraction.
I've already learned that, thank you. Please, just go home. Oh. What's this? Your summer project isn't finished yet. Ensley peered over at Miranda's planner. I remember those days. With summer projects, you never really know what to do, right? It's hard to find something you actually want to research. In that regard, Miranda, I'm kinda envious.
What do you mean? Well, not many kids are born with such an interesting face like you. Why don't you compile something about that condition? It'd be easy, right? LOL. It's about yourself, so you wouldn't have to research much.
I couldn't stay silent at my sister-in-law's incredibly insensitive remark.
Enough, Ensley. There are things you should and shouldn't say, even if we're family. Oh, scary, scary. I was just stating the facts. If she compiles something about her interesting condition, everyone will be pleased, won't they?
Ensley is calling Miranda's condition interesting. Laughing, without knowing how much pain and suffering Miranda and we have gone through. Miranda, don't worry about what such a person says. I grabbed Ensley's arm, trying to drag her out of the house with all my might. That's when Miranda stood up slowly and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Mom. I've decided." In contrast to me, who was about to explode with anger, Miranda was completely calm. Well then, Miranda, I don't quite understand, but your mom seems really angry, so I'll leave. Ensley said without a shred of remorse, smirking creepily as she prepared to leave. I wanted to unleash my anger on her, but Miranda pulled at the hem of my shirt, stopping me. You too, Mom, shouldn't worry about what that person says. Looking at the suddenly quiet entrance after Ensley left, Miranda spoke. She must have some plan in mind. Thinking this, I managed to suppress my anger. 3 months passed. Miranda, it's okay to relax a bit. Saying that, the national newspaper reporter eased the slightly tense expression on Miranda's face. Dressed in new clothes bought for this day, Miranda smiled with confidence. That's the spirit. You're doing great. Praised by the handsome reporter, Miranda's cheeks flushed slightly. 3 months ago, I couldn't have imagined Miranda being interviewed by a national newspaper. The interview took place in a small cafe in the neighborhood, which we had reserved. The owner, who I've known for a long time, whispered to me, "Hasn't Miranda become quite beautiful?" Indeed, the last time the owner saw Mirinda was before her fourth surgery. As Mirinda's mother, always watching her closely, it was hard for me to notice. But acquaintances who saw her without a mask after a long time were often surprised. Mirinda's treatment had progressed so much that her facial structure from her mouth to her nose was indistinguishable from other children's. Of course, some surgery scars remained, but they were hardly noticeable unless pointed out. Let's take one last photo. Smile. Prompted by the reporter, Mirinda smiled broadly without her mask. 3 months ago, on the night Ensley left, Mirinda declared to me, "I've decided on my summer project theme. I want everyone to know about me. I'll do what Aunt suggested." She didn't seem bothered by Ensley's words. In fact, she seemed more radiant than before. "Is that okay with you, Mirinda?" I asked. Laughing a little, Mirinda said, "Mom, you're always overprotective. I'm not the crybaby I used to be. This is something I've decided to do myself." Seeing my daughter so full of confidence, I felt reassured. "All right, then I won't stop you. Go ahead as you think is best, Mirinda." "Okay, got it." From that day, Mirinda began to confront her condition of cleft lip and palate again. Shortly after starting elementary school, she had been teased by classmates about the shape of her nose and mouth. Suffering in silence because she couldn't tell her parents. She compiled the numerous surgeries she underwent and the teasing into a booklet, including photos from those times. There's one photo that is particularly meaningful to me. It was taken the day Mirinda first opened up to us about the mean things said at school. Although she protested, "No, don't take a picture," I took it anyway. "Why did you take a photo?" She protested tearfully, but I hugged her tightly. "Someday, we'll look back at this day and laugh, Mirinda." At the time, Mirinda couldn't understand and just cried out of frustration. Afterward, we discussed why people hold such prejudices. We concluded that prejudice stems from ignorance. Indeed, cleft lip and palate is a rare condition, affecting 1 in 1,000 people. But with ongoing treatment, one's appearance can become indistinguishable from others. We hoped that more people knowing about the condition and its treatment would reduce the instances of patients being viewed strangely. That became our family's unified wish. In advancing her summer project, Mirinda set up a special website and conducted a survey for children suffering from the same condition and their parents. This revealed that other families, like ours, were troubled and pained by prejudice. Good luck, Mirinda. You're very brave. If there's anything we can do, just let us know. I realized Mirinda had many supportive comrades suffering from the same condition. Mom, thank you for giving birth to me. Thank you for raising me. Because you supported me, I was able to get this far. Mirinda whispered, looking at the photo. The hard worker is you, I replied. Mirinda had undergone numerous surgeries since she was very young. Especially the fourth surgery, which involved transplanting bone from her pelvis to her upper jaw, was the most challenging, leaving her unable to walk on her own for a while, but she never complained. She is truly a strong child. Of course, I feel like hiding my face with a mask. But I've come to think that this unique aspect of mine could be considered cool. Mirinda said confidently. A month after summer vacation ended, Mirinda came home from school and said, Look. My summer project was highly praised at school, and I was awarded this certificate. She showed me the certificate, breathless and sweaty from her excitement. My friend said I was cool. Mirinda happily shared her school experiences. A month after that, a newspaper company contacted us for an interview. I read the interview article. Mirinda, you're amazing. Mirinda's article was published in a national newspaper, catching the eye of Dennis, who was on a work assignment. He immediately video called us.
If you were going to be published, you could have told me. I was just reading the newspaper when suddenly I see Miranda's face all over it. And I spit out the coffee I was drinking from surprise. It wouldn't have been fun if I told you beforehand. I wanted to see your reaction without saying anything first.
So, I fell for the surprise, huh? Dennis laughed heartily over the video call. Miranda peeked out and said, "Are you happy to see your daughter's face after so long, Dad?" "Well, yes. But you really gathered courage to compile something about your condition, didn't you?" Then, Miranda's smile faded, and she answered seriously.
I presented it because I wanted to reduce the number of people who, like Aunt, say hurtful things out of ignorance about diseases and disabilities. Ensley? Did she say something to you?
We revealed the hurtful things Ensley had said to Miranda during her summer visit.
That girl.
Dennis sighed. "I'll give her a piece of my mind." The next day, we received a call from Mael.
I read Miranda's article. It's amazing, Miranda. But I heard Ensley said terrible things. Dennis called me yesterday, and I was shocked.
Luke is furious. He's been saying he won't forgive Ensley since yesterday. I'm worried his blood pressure might go up. But Ensley really is trouble,
Mael said,
promising to make Ensley apologize soon. A few days later, Ensley came to visit as promised.
Are you there? If you are, come out already.
She banged on the door so hard I worried it might break, not seeming like she came to apologize, but rather irritated. When I went to answer, there stood Ensley, looking devilish.
What are you doing on your own?
She protested, not apologizing but complaining instead. I had no idea why Ensley was so angry. When I remained silent, thanks to your daughter stirring things up, I got yelled at by my parents and bro. Now I feel uncomfortable at home. How are you going to take responsibility? She demanded. Apparently, Ensley had been severely scolded by my in-laws and Dennis because of Miranda's project. But I thought it was all Ensley's fault. Unable to hold back my anger at Ensley's lack of remorse, I exploded.
Enough, Ensley. If you're not here to apologize, please leave.
I finally let out the anger I had been holding back, even to Ensley, who kept repeating her arrogant attitude. For the first time, I openly protested, leaving Ensley momentarily taken aback.
Whether you're my husband's sister or whoever, anyone who hurts my precious daughter is not family. Don't come to our house again. You're nothing but trouble. What? Getting angry all of a sudden? Silly. Even though I came to apologize, you're kicking me out. Fine then. I'll tell the family you're a stubborn DIL. Just remember that.
Miranda interjected while listening beside me. Aunt.
I'm recording our conversation, so lying is useless.
It'll be found out soon anyway, she said, admonishing Ensley like a child who won't listen.
Oh well. I guess I'll forgive you just for today then.
With those final words, Ensley left with a pale face.
Ah, that feels so much better.
Now in 5th grade, Miranda seems more mature than ever to me. She never used to complain, not because she didn't want to but because she didn't want to worry us. But now, it's different. Miranda isn't holding back tears anymore. She doesn't even feel the need to cry because she's become so strong and resilient. Looking at Miranda's serene profile, I couldn't help but feel a bit reflective. Maybe I've been too worried about her. With the sole intention of not letting her feel lonely, I quit my job to always be there for her. But it seems Miranda is fine now. Without me realizing, she has grown up and surrounded herself with many strong allies. Lately, she's been bringing school friends home more frequently.
What? Is there something on my face?
Miranda noticed my gaze and looked at me questioningly. Yes, lots of happiness.
What? That makes no sense.
Laughing at my response, Miranda seemed amused. Feeling her growth, I decided to rejoin the workforce at an apparel company I had been invited to rejoin. Eleanor, I read the newspaper. Miranda did great, didn't she? Every time my coworkers mentioned it, I calmly responded, she probably doesn't think she did anything extraordinary. She just presented her life as it is. One evening, Miranda shared her future dreams with me.
I want to become a doctor. To help children and families suffering from diseases and disabilities like mine. Facing myself through my summer project made me think that. And I've been thinking lately, there are people who can't run fast, those who struggle with studies. Tall people, short people. My condition is just another trait among those.
Hearing her aspirations, I felt hopeful for her future.
Oh, and by the way, a boy in my class told me he likes me.
Miranda casually mentioned her dream and then shared this news. Reporting this to Dennis via video call, he panicked.
What? Isn't it too early for her to be in a relationship? Hey, are you okay with this?
Calm down, my dear husband. I calmed down the frantically panicking Dennis. The fact that a boy confessed to Miranda probably means that the kids around her have stopped caring about her condition. As for Ensley, I heard she was kicked out by Dennis and the in-laws. Ensley, who had been lazing around at home every day without working part-time, finally decided to become independent after losing financial support. In reality, she had no choice but to do so. Now, she struggles with living alone in a small, old apartment, earning a little from part-time work. The wish Miranda had for her summer project, to reduce ignorant and hurtful comments about diseases and disabilities, is also my wish. Of course, 1 or 2 actions alone won't change the world. But that's exactly why we, who know the struggles and pain, must continue to spread the truth to the world. I vowed in my heart to continue watching over Miranda, ensuring her growth isn't hindered. Dennis has decided to return from his assignment. Dennis convinced his boss to allow him to work predominantly remotely. I won't let you two feel lonely again, he said. But then, you came back because you're worried Miranda might get a boyfriend, aren't you?
That's not the case,
Dennis awkwardly responded. Anyway, we're back to living happily and closely as a family of 3. A family that's always full of laughter, our pride and joy.
Seems like a son's wife is just an outsider, huh? No need to waste fancy coffee on a stranger like you. We'll enjoy it ourselves.
With that, Emil grinned wickedly. Well, if that's how it's going to be, so be it. This is a game. A doubles game between Emil Elizabeth and Sale Felicia versus me and my husband. Strategy is key in a game. Just you watch. So, I cheerfully responded, gladly, with a big smile. My name is Diana. A 32-year-old working mother. Married to Elliot for 5 years. The day to build our own house has finally arrived. Building a house has been our goal since the beginning of our marriage. We visited various houses, took our time deciding, and diligently saved up. When our child was born 2 years into the marriage, our plans hit a snag. But Elliot and I persevered, and finally, we reached our savings goal. However, actually building the house was harder than imagined. A house is a big purchase. You can't just buy another if something goes wrong. We considered factors like transportation convenience, shopping accessibility, a child-friendly environment, and the reputation of local schools. And whether it was an easy commute for Elliot, a full-time employee. So many things to consider, even just finding the right location was tough. We eventually settled near the in-laws' house. It wasn't out of preference, but because the location was good. It wasn't about living together, but about bearing with minor annoyances. Once the land was decided, it was time to order the house. This was another challenge. Building our ideal home, with budget at the forefront, was full of issues. We progressed, step by step. But complicating matters further were Elizabeth and Felicia. For some reason, they kept interfering. When we mentioned building a house, both suddenly became interested. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled, and Felicia, in her late 20s and single, was excited.
Where will it be built? Which home builder are you using? What will the interior look like?
They asked all sorts of questions. I tried to brush them off. But then they somehow found out about our meetings with the home builder and the architect and started crashing them. How do they even find these things out?
Sorry, it was me who talked.
Elliot apologized. So you're the culprit. Even glaring at him, it was too late.
If the kitchen storage is too little,
Elizabeth would say,
having a wooden deck is essential.
Felicia would add, somebody, please sew these two's mouths shut.
If you're doing barbecues in the garden, a big sink would be useful. A walk-in closet should be bigger, too. The windows should definitely be double-glazed for soundproofing. We'll need a bedroom for Mom and Dad, right? Shouldn't there be a room for Felicia to stay in too?
One after another. Wait, hold on. Why do we need a bedroom for the parents-in-law? And what's this about a room for Felicia? Ignoring Elliot and me, Elizabeth and Felicia, with almost a smirk, keep butting in, making the architect give a wry smile. After they left, I had to confirm with Elliot. I hoped not, but I had this bad feeling.
Hey, we're not planning to live together, right?
From their manner of speaking, I couldn't shake the feeling they were plotting just that. I hesitantly asked Elliot, who shook his head in a hurry.
No way! Dad wouldn't think of leaving the house he's used to. And Felicia's old enough, even if our parents' house was gone, there's no way she'd move in with us. That's what I thought.
Elliot denied it, but my anxiety didn't disappear. Somehow ignoring Elizabeth and Felicia's interference, we decided on the design and started construction. And a year later, our dream house was finally completed. It was tough, long, and oh so annoying. Lying on the living room sofa after moving in, I closed my eyes and recalled all the hardships. It was educational and fun looking at various properties.
Hey Mom, is it okay to put my cup here? Why not? Let's use this corner of the cupboard for mine and Felicia's things.
There were times, pointed out by the architect, when I felt disheartened by the difference between the ideal and the reality.
The best room on the second floor has to be sunny, right? I'll take the biggest one? Yeah, I'm getting old. A small room would be tiring. Let's go with that.
I really wanted to plant a viburnum in the garden. But who knew I'd have to research the type of soil, too.
Okay, then I'll call the moving company.
Thanks. You're reliable, Felicia. And then there's, wait, what's with these people swarming my house?
Elizabeth and Felicia. Why are you meddling with things inside the house? We're just moving things to make it more livable.
Felicia replied nonchalantly to my question. My clothes, still in boxes, were pushed to a corner, and somehow Felicia's clothes were making their way into the closet. Elizabeth too.
This new house is nice. It's exciting,
said, making herself coffee and starting to eat cookies. No, crumbs on the floor.
Hey, both of you, stop doing whatever you please. This is our house, you know.
I shouted, panicked, as the two behaved as if they were the ones who would be living here. But at that moment, the atmosphere changed.
What are you talking about?
Felicia said.
Huh?
As I tilted my head in confusion, Felicia pointed and continued.
This house was built by my brother Elliot.
Elizabeth nodded in agreement.
That's right. It's my son Elliot's house. What's wrong with parents or siblings living here?
There's plenty wrong with it. The worry I had since before the house was built seemed to be turning into reality. Could it be these two?
Then that settles it. Felicia and I will take the big room on the second floor. The room next to it will be Elliot's, no problem, right? There's a big problem. The big room is for me and my husband, and the next room is for our son.
What are you talking about?
Elliot and the grandson can just share.
What Elizabeth said made no sense.
No, it's too small for Elliot, me, and our son.
Elliot and the grandson can manage.
I'm here too, you know.
What are you talking about? That's when Elizabeth looked at me with a sinister smile.
Listen here. This house was built by Elliot, who's related by blood. That means it's the right of his blood relatives to live here. You're just an outsider, a stranger. You should just sleep on that sofa over there,
she said, pointing to the sofa. You're kidding, right? Elizabeth and Felicia seem serious about living in this house. My precious home is about to be occupied by this alien mother-daughter duo. Worried, I consulted Elliot that night. Luckily, they hadn't stayed over yet, but since they were talking about movers, they might seriously start living here soon.
Hey, are you really going to give them the biggest room?
No way. Of course not. When I told Elliot about today, he frowned.
But they're talking about turning our room into Elizabeth and Felicia's room?
That's a bit much. Elliot, looking troubled, tilted his head and talked with Elizabeth and Felicia the next day. And I thought they understood.
What, Elizabeth? What are you doing?
We're moving in. They didn't get it at all. During the day, when our son was at daycare and Elliot was at work, Elizabeth arrived with movers and started bringing in boxes.
Moving in!
Really, such an inflexible daughter-in-law. Why should we have to settle for a small room? That's practically ungrateful. After all, a son's wife is just a stranger.
Didn't Elliot tell you anything?
He did.
No to the big room.
What a narrowed-down version of the story. Living in this house at all is the problem. I was stunned as they moved everything in. The space intended for our son's room was now occupied by heaps of cardboard boxes, and then Felicia arrived. Oh no, it's a small room.
Felicia. What on earth? Hi, Diana, let's get along from now on. Since it's the joyous first day of moving in, let's have a luxurious dinner, okay?
No. Ignoring me, Elizabeth and Felicia disappeared into their room and closed the door. Oh, great. Due to Elizabeth and Felicia's surprise invasion, our new home was now occupied by the enemy. Suddenly, I was living with the occupying force. Cleaning, laundry, cooking, all my responsibility, which I wasn't happy about. And them using our stuff without permission was upsetting. But I couldn't really tell them not to use things since we were living together. As I was thinking this, Felicia took out a bottle of wine. That was something I bought for myself, but before I could say anything, she drank it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Elizabeth generously using my expensive lotion. That's expensive stuff. I ordered various things for the luxurious dinner, and of course, I had to pay. Elizabeth and Felicia ate all the delivered dinner. I didn't get a single bite. Elizabeth and Felicia always took showers before me, my husband, and our son. And they always left the hot water running. They never contributed to the utility bills. And they watched TV late into the night at high volume. The house was a mess, dirty everywhere. I'm always positive. Gradually, the absurdity became amusing. I decided to enjoy it. This was a hospitality game with Elizabeth and Felicia. Getting angry is bad for the skin, after all. So, let the hospitality game begin. One holiday. During a day off when Elliot and our son were home, Felicia woke up scratching her head and sat at the dining table. And she asked me, I'm so sleepy. Didn't get enough sleep. Is there coffee? Still sleepy after sleeping till noon. Then Elizabeth woke up. And similarly, Diana, make some coffee, she said, so I stood up. This is a game, a game. I win if I impress them. With that thought, I opened the cabinet with the coffee. Let's see, there should be the instant coffee I bought yesterday. It was a bit more expensive than usual. I showed it with a smug face, but they both looked disappointed. Don't they like it? Then Felicia stood up and started searching the cabinet. And found it, she said, taking out coffee beans. Those are from a gift Elliot got from his boss. It's not just any coffee, it's premium. We don't drink coffee from beans at home, so it was kind of wasted on us. Misunderstanding my expression, Felicia smirked. What, hiding such good beans, Diana? You're so mean. Eh? Elizabeth nodded at Felicia's words. Really? You don't want us, who are not blood-related, to drink delicious coffee. You're definitely an outsider. Such an outsider doesn't deserve this luxury coffee. What? We'll drink this gifted premium coffee. An outsider like you is fine with instant coffee, LOL. And Elizabeth laughed. This is not making any sense. But there's no interpreter. For me, it's actually a relief that they're using up the bean coffee. Seeing Elliot nodding in agreement. Sure, I'd be glad to, I said with a smile. She probably didn't expect that kind of response. What? Elizabeth looked surprised. Ignoring that, I took the coffee beans from Felicia. All right, I'll make some delicious coffee now. Okay then. Felicia seemed puzzled by my smile. There I was, rolling up my sleeves, ready to go. Let the game begin, making delicious coffee. But when I opened the bag and saw the beans, I was a bit stumped. I called Elliot, who was looking worried, for a consultation. He came over as I gestured. What's up? Hey. How do you use coffee beans? I've never made coffee from beans before. I asked Elliot, but I don't know either. He replied. Now we're in trouble. Our game of making the best coffee has hit a snag right from the start. Should we look it up online? No, that's the last resort. What to do then? Just have to wring out whatever little knowledge we have. I think you have to grind them into a powder, said Elliot. Okay, that makes sense. But we don't have a mill or a blender. What about a mortar? It got lost during the move. After some thought. Maybe it's fine just to use the beans as they are? I strongly agreed with Elliot's suggestion. So, let's give it a try. Beans as they are, into the coffee maker's filter. Okay, pour hot water over this. Look, Diana, it's getting color. Really? So it's a success. The color is super light, but surely that's what premium coffee looks like. Encouraged, we continued pouring hot water. It's done. We've made premium coffee. We proudly presented it to Elizabeth and Felicia. Elizabeth and Felicia sighed deeply at us.
Finally done? How long did it take you to? Seriously. Because of a stranger son's wife, time is wasted. It's so light.
Elizabeth smirked as she criticized me, then screamed when she saw the coffee.
What? It's so light. Is this tea?
Felicia frowned at the coffee too. We, the couple, shook our heads in disbelief.
Genuine premium coffee, extracted from high-quality beans. It's probably light in color because it's high class. We have milk and sugar if you need, but you should try it straight first.
With a musical note, I cheerfully pushed the cups towards them.
But... Please, go ahead. Elliot, is this really premium coffee? Yeah, the finest kind Diana and I made. Try it.
After being cheerfully encouraged by both of us, they reluctantly tasted the coffee. Immediately after.
So weak. Disgusting.
Elizabeth and Felicia both exclaimed.
What is this? This is not coffee. What is this? It's definitely weird. Diana, how did you make this coffee?
I just poured hot water over the beans.
What?
Was something wrong? I looked at Elliot, but he just shrugged. Weird, I just made it normally.
Too high class for your taste? Huh? I am a woman who suits high class stuff. It's this coffee that's odd. Ah, good. Then please drink it all. No, but I mean... Here you go.
If high-end stuff suits them, they'll surely get used to it while drinking. So, there's only one thing to do. I pushed the coffee cup to Felicia's mouth and made her drink forcefully. Meanwhile, Elliot, calling it filial piety, was encouraging Elizabeth to drink. Now, this is getting fun. The daily game is enjoyable.
Elizabeth, shall we clean your room? Hey, at least knock first. Sorry. Since you always enter our room without knocking, I thought it wasn't necessary. Felicia, all this stuff on the floor is trash, right? I'll throw it all away. That's a premium bag. Elizabeth, since you said the seasoning was too light yesterday, I made it stronger today. Too strong. Not just strong, it's spicy.
Felicia, it seems you like my lotion, but I have something better. It has a unique smell, but it's good for your skin.
Smelly. What is this? Don't put it on my face.
The game of pleasing them was getting more and more fun. I continued to serve them with increasing enthusiasm. They cried with joy, so I win. Elliot was also doing various things, but as I spend more time with them, I have the advantage. Then one day, Elizabeth and Felicia disappeared. Huh? Then I received a call from Fael. Oh right, Freddie from the in-laws' house. How has he been? Enjoying a carefree solo life? That's good. According to Freddie,
Elizabeth and Felicia came back crying. What happened? Elizabeth's lips are swollen, and Felicia's skin is shiny but smells terrible,
he said. They must have been so happy they went to report to Freddie. But they shouldn't think it's over yet. There's a barbecue in the garden tonight. I'm setting up a trampoline for Elizabeth and Felicia to enjoy, so I'll go pick them up now. I announced and went to fetch them from the in-laws' house. For some reason, they ran away, and a chase began. Eventually, I easily caught elderly Elizabeth and Felicia, who boasted about knowing all the hiding spots since childhood, was found by Elliot.
Stop it! Stop it, please!
They cried with joy, no need to be shy. A few days later, movers suddenly arrived and took Elizabeth and Felicia's stuff away. Why? I wanted to show more hospitality. I said to them hiding behind Freddie at the in-laws' house, and they shook their heads vigorously with pale faces. Elliot looked genuinely disappointed. Hey Elliot, seems like our hospitality wasn't enough for Elizabeth and them. Is that so? Maybe we need to study more. Hearing this conversation, Elizabeth and Felicia began to tremble. After that, Elizabeth and Felicia stopped coming to our house. Even when I greet them in the neighborhood, "Hello," they run away immediately. Well, it's fine. Peaceful days returned. We remodeled their room into our son's room, and were even talking about having another child. Feeling a bit unfulfilled now the game is over, unnoticed Freddie stood beside me. The real ditzy ones never realize they're ditzy, do they? And muttered. Factory worker father? Breaking off the engagement. As soon as she said that, Edith, my mother-in-law, threw her coffee at my dad. Beside her, laughing, my father-in-law, John, made no move to stop Edith. Coffee stains quickly spread across the suit Dad had specially cleaned for this day. Fortunately, the coffee was lukewarm and there was no risk of a burn. I offered Dad a handkerchief in surprise, while Timothy frantically tried to clean his suit. While worrying about any injuries, Timothy scolded his parents, who just kept laughing. During this, Dad said nothing, simply stood up, pointed at them, and declared, "Then I'll just have to ruin your company." He said this in a voice I had never heard before, took my hand, and we left the house. Behind us, Timothy's shouts at his parents echoed, and soon he followed us. "I'm terribly sorry. I'll make sure my parents apologize later." "No need. It's over. We're cutting ties," he said somberly, patting Timothy on the shoulder. "My name is Penelope, a 26-year-old office worker. My family has a bit of a unique situation. I grew up without a mom. She passed away when I was young, and Dad raised me single-handedly. Despite being busy as a factory manager, he never missed a school event. He'd often rush back to work after these events, but I've always respected him deeply for it. During college, I dated Timothy, who was 2 years my senior. He was gentle, sincere, and popular at university. Despite knowing it was a long shot, I confessed to him, and he accepted. However, Timothy had his worries, mainly about his parents. He spoke of them only in vague terms, never delving into details. It seemed there was some conflict with them, but I didn't press, though it troubled me. Still, Timothy himself was flawless, so our relationship continued. He lived alone since starting university, but occasionally visited his parents. He'd return exhausted, clearly stressed about them. He always put me first, making him my pride and joy. I had always wanted to introduce him to Dad, the man I respected and my beloved boyfriend. I wondered how they would react to each other. One day, while on a date, we unexpectedly bumped into Dad. "Oh, Dad. Aren't you supposed to be at work? What are you doing here?" "Ah, Penelope. Just returning from a client." "And who's this?" "Oh, this is Timothy. We're dating." Dad, not usually stern but with a somewhat fierce look, can be misunderstood. Timothy was very nervous meeting Dad for the first time. "Nice to meet you, I'm Timothy. I am fortunate to be dating Penelope." Timothy greeted Dad quickly in a tense manner. Dad warmly accepted him, chatting and laughing with him. "So, you're Penelope's boyfriend. Don't be so nervous. Take good care of her." "Yes, I will. Thank you." As they continued talking, Timothy's nervousness faded, and they got along well. I was relieved to see the two most important men in my life getting along. I had worried about Dad's reaction, but he had to return to work. So we parted ways. After Dad left, I turned to Timothy, who seemed to be in a daze. When I asked what was wrong, he suddenly became excited. "That was really your dad, right?" I was puzzled by his unexpected words, but since it was the truth, I answered without hesitation. "Yes, that was my dad. Is there something wrong with that?" Right, that makes sense, that was him, huh? He crossed his arms and seemed lost in thought for a while. Curious, I decided to ask him what was on his mind.
What are you thinking about so hard? Did you not like him?
No way, that's not it. I do like him, but, well. His hesitant reply was all I got, and any further questions were evaded. I became anxious as he wouldn't tell me the reason. I wondered if, despite his words, he actually found it hard to get along with my dad. And so, I began to worry unnecessarily. A few days later, Timothy called me out, saying he had something important to talk about. Maybe because of the recent meeting with my dad, I felt unusually nervous as I went to our meeting spot. When I arrived at the cafe, he was already there. Through the glass, I could see him looking downcast. This deepened my anxiety, but I decided to act cheerfully anyway. As I entered the cafe and approached him slowly, I said, "Timothy, sorry, did you wait long?" I crept up behind him and spoke, tapping his shoulder, which startled him.
"Penelope, you scared me."
Startled, he caught his breath as he saw me. And I was surprised to see how much I had startled him. He had been that deep in thought. Sitting opposite the still gloomy him, I placed our order. His continued gloom only increased my anxiety. Desperate to hear what was on his mind, I spoke to him. "Hey, Timothy. What's bothering you so much? Didn't you like my dad?" When I asked, Timothy looked up and immediately denied it. "No, not at all. I actually respect your dad. That's why my. He stopped mid-sentence and looked down again, causing me to sigh. Realizing I had no choice but to press for an answer, I asked directly.
"If you have a problem, I want to know. What's troubling you?"
He took a deep breath as if making up his mind, then began to share. "I have something to tell you about my parents. It's a long story, but I need you to hear it all." The story he shared was shocking. According to him, his parents lacked grace and only judged people by their education and jobs. He had suffered a lot because of them, as they habitually interfered with his life. Whenever he introduced a girlfriend, they would criticize her and drive her away. The women would leave, often in tears, breaking up with him. That's why he wanted to marry me, but was troubled about bringing up his parents. But that's not a problem. We just don't have to involve them after getting married, and endure only during the marriage proposal. Dad seemed to like Timothy, so what was the issue?
"I don't mind about that, it's okay. Dad liked you too, so don't worry."
"Really? That makes me happy. When I first met your dad, I was shocked to see how different he was from my own parents. I thought, if I marry Penelope, I'll become the son of such a great dad, even if it's just by marriage. But getting married means your parents become mine too, and I couldn't make up my mind." He brightened up when I mentioned Dad liked him, but then he sighed deeply again. However, an idea seemed to strike him, and he looked up, apologizing. "When we go to my parents to announce our marriage, can your dad come with us? I want them to know such an admirable person exists. It might not change them immediately, but I hope it will make them rethink." "Okay. I'll talk to Dad. But I wish you had told me this more straightforwardly."
"Oh, sorry. I'll properly do it now."
Realizing his oversight, he hastily made a proper marriage proposal. Having accepted his proposal, I decided to discuss it with Dad. Initially reluctant, Dad agreed to join us for the marriage proposal visit after Timothy asked. We then coordinated with Timothy to schedule a visit to his parents. On the day of the visit, we stood in front of Timothy's parents' house, all of us neatly dressed. It was my first time meeting Timothy's parents, and knowing their reputation made me nervous. Seeing us tense, Dad chuckled and reassured us.
"Don't be so stiff. Timothy's parents are just overly concerned. Be confident."
Feeling reassured by Dad's pat on our shoulders, my tension eased slightly. As the appointed time arrived, Timothy rang the doorbell. But there was no sound inside, making us wonder if they were not home. In a bit of a panic, Timothy rang the bell again, but still no response. Feeling awkward in front of Dad, Timothy excused himself and went inside first. Dad and I exchanged glances, waiting silently for Timothy to return. After a short while, Timothy reappeared at the entrance, looking flustered. Before I could ask what happened, he started making excuses with a forced smile. "Sorry, I was just delayed. Please wait a bit longer, I'll be ready soon." He quickly went back inside. Dad sighed in disbelief at this behavior, and I felt increasingly anxious. I feared this incident might derail the marriage talks. Though Dad is not quick-tempered, he dislikes dishonesty. So, I couldn't help but consider the worst-case scenario. As these thoughts crossed my mind, Timothy finally came back to the entrance. Apologizing, he invited us inside. Inside, Timothy's parents were already sitting on the sofa, but their demeanor was strange. Editham, his mother, greeted us with a sarcastic smile and arrogant attitude, while John, his father, seemed disinterested and looked away. Though we were led to the sitting room, the coffee served was lukewarm. Silent since our arrival, Timothy's behavior, and the tense atmosphere made me uneasy. However, knowing we needed to greet them, I tried to compose myself. As Timothy introduced his parents and us, I felt warmth in my heart from his considerate introduction of Dad and me. But his parents scoffed at our introduction, and the next moment, Edith's hand reached for her cup, shocking me. "Factory worker father? Breaking off the engagement." As soon as she said that, Edith threw her coffee at Dad. Beside her, laughing, John made no move to stop Edith. Coffee stains quickly spread across the suit he had specially cleaned for this day. Fortunately, the coffee was lukewarm, and there was no risk of a burn. I offered Dad a handkerchief in surprise, while Timothy frantically tried to clean Dad's suit. While worrying about injuries, Timothy scolded his parents, who just kept laughing. During this, Dad said nothing, simply stood up, pointed at them, and declared, "Then I'll just have to ruin your company." He said this in a voice I had never heard before, took my hand, and we left the house. Behind us, Timothy's shouts at his parents echoed, and soon he followed us. "I'm terribly sorry. I'll make sure my parents apologize later." "No need. It's over. We're cutting ties," Dad said somberly, patting Timothy on the shoulder. Then we went back to our house with Timothy, and Dad immediately changed his clothes. Meanwhile, Timothy earnestly apologized outside Dad's room, with Dad's troubled voice occasionally heard. But I was too shocked by Edith's actions to pay much attention to anything else. From the moment I saw their faces, I knew getting along would be difficult due to their arrogant attitude. But I never expected them to do something like that, and I was furious that they belittled Dad. Sitting on the living room sofa and clenching my fists, I kept replaying the earlier events. I knew getting worked up wouldn't help, but I couldn't help myself. Eventually, Dad came into the living room after changing, followed by Timothy, who immediately apologized to me. "Penelope, I'm truly sorry. I had no idea they would do something like that, let alone belittle someone. I'm really sorry, I did a terrible thing." Timothy probably knew it wasn't something easily forgiven. The fact he didn't ask for forgiveness showed his sincerity. This made me feel like I should apologize to him. I took Timothy's hand, who was on his knees, and apologized. "I'm sorry too for saying something so thoughtless without knowing anything. I never expected it to turn out like this." Then I turned to Dad to offer my deepest apology. "Dad, I'm sorry too. My careless suggestion led to this mess." Dad just looked down and shrugged his shoulders in response to my apology. It's no wonder he didn't say anything. This situation was unexpected for everyone here. But this meant his earlier words might actually come true. I decided to ask him directly about his intentions. "Dad, what you said to them earlier, was that true? Are you really planning to ruin their company?" In response to my question, Dad looked at Timothy and then nodded firmly. "Yes, it's true. I do intend to do it. His company's performance has been poor, and I've been thinking about what to do with it. It's a good opportunity to cut it off." Dad's eyes were serious and unwavering. He is the owner of a factory, a well-known leading local company where he started as a worker. He first worked as a worker at this factory. He gave up his dream of becoming a painter after Mom passed away to raise me alone. Working tirelessly in the factory, his hard work was recognized and he climbed the ranks. Eventually, he was favored by the previous president and promoted repeatedly. When the previous president, or rather, the former factory manager, wanted to retire, Dad was chosen to take over. The factory owns several subsidiaries, and one of them is managed by John, Timothy's father. This was revealed during the earlier greeting. John should have recognized this, but he failed to, as Edith acted first, before Timothy introduced him in detail. Timothy just wanted to say that Dad worked in the factory, which is the parent company of John's. But Edith and John's prejudice led to this unfortunate situation. If they had listened properly, this might not have happened. Dad said John's company seemed to be mismanaged. This could potentially affect Dad's factory, so he had been considering what action to take.
I was thinking of layoffs to improve management, but I'd rather avoid that if possible. It seemed like the right time to make a cut.
He smiled troubledly, probably not wanting to lay off employees. Regret tinged his words. After saying this, he turned to Timothy and said in a low voice,
"I've decided to do it, but it means your parents will be in trouble. It's harsh, but are you sure you're okay with this?"
Faced with this question, Timothy hesitated for a moment but then looked Dad in the eye and replied,
"I've already cut ties with them. They did unforgivable things. They need to atone for it, and I want them to reflect on this incident and everything else. More than that, I have a request. It's inappropriate at this time, but I must ask, please let me get engaged to Penelope. I'm aware of the trouble my parents caused. More than anything, I want to be with Penelope. Please allow it."
Dad crossed his arms, deep in thought. It may seem inconsiderate right after such an incident. However, moved by Timothy's fervor, I also pleaded with Dad.
"I also ask you, Dad. Despite everything, I want to be with Timothy."
After hearing our pleas, Dad hummed for a bit before shaking his head as if resigned.
"If both of you feel the same, then it's fine. But there's a condition. Your parents are business owners, after all. I want to know what will happen to their employees. If you can't answer that, your marriage is off."
Dad said this and sent Timothy out, not even glancing at me before returning to his room. A few days later, Timothy came with a plan regarding John's company's employees. He had promised Dad beforehand and was discussing it when I returned from work. Apparently, Timothy had listed potential new jobs for all the employees and was showing it to Dad.
"So, I would like to ask, albeit presumptuously, for these employees to transfer to your company. I hope to support their employment there, contributing to the business's growth."
Timothy was earnestly requesting Dad to hire them.
"And I know it's selfish, but I would like to join the company too. I'll work without salary until their work stabilizes and shows results. I want to compensate for the shortcomings with my work and salary. Once that's done, I'd like to marry Penelope."
Timothy seemed to blame himself for the company's downfall. He wanted to work hard as a lubricant in the situation. I was just learning now that our marriage would be delayed, but it seemed unavoidable.
"Welcome back, Penelope. You heard, right? I'm sorry for deciding something so important on my own. But I couldn't be happy just myself." "That's too much, Timothy. Dad, let me join the company too. I'll work alongside Timothy, so please accept his proposal."
As I said this, Timothy tried to stop me. But I refused to back down and desperately begged Dad. While we were doing this, Dad remained silent. But after our repeated pleas, he finally unfolded his arms and quietly nodded. Meanwhile, Timothy's parents hadn't apologized yet. Dad had been waiting these past days, but that was coming to an end.
"Time's up,"
he muttered, beginning preparations to take over John's company. Time passed, and John's company finally collapsed. Then, Timothy received a furious call from his parents, and the three of us were summoned to their house. When we arrived at their home, it was crowded with people. They were all protesting the company's collapse, shouting angrily. John probably hadn't explained anything to the employees. By calling us there, it seemed they intended to shift their own blunders onto us. As soon as they spotted us, they began pointing and accusing.
Look there! They're the cause of everything, not me. They destroyed the company, not me. It's true. Especially that woman, she seduced our son and ingratiated herself with his father. We're the victims here. So stop making such a fuss.
As Timothy's parents ranted, trying to deflect from themselves. Although he got angry with his parents saying whatever they want, he was trying to soothe the protesting crowd.
Please wait, everyone. Yes, my father's company collapsed, but it's because of those two. And I've arranged job placements for all of you. Please hear me out.
The crowd gradually quieted down, and they began listening to us. Timothy read out each person's name, informing them of their next job. The former employees, who realized that they won't get laid off, seemed relieved. After announcing everyone's new positions, Timothy's parents started causing a scene.
Hey, Timothy. What about us? Why ignore us? Tell us our job placements. If you do, we'll forgive that man and even approve your marriage to that woman.
Ignoring their wailing, Timothy began explaining the circumstances of the company's downfall. The former employees, who realized that they won't be laid off, seemed relieved.
Which is why I'm truly sorry for the trouble. Thanks to our generous president, your jobs are saved. Please, let's start anew without anger.
Turning to Dad, Timothy gave an expression of gratitude.
We've caused so much trouble. Thank you for indulging our selfishness. I promise to work diligently.
The former employees, moved by Timothy's actions, also appreciate to Dad. Amidst this, his parents were the only ones dissenting.
Don't be fooled. That man destroyed the company, and she instigated it. Face reality. You've lost your jobs because of them, right? Just because they've helped you now doesn't mean you should lose sight of the truth.
Despite their desperate appeals, no one paid any attention to Timothy's parents. Especially after hearing the whole story from Timothy earlier. Even Dad ignored their words. As the former employees looked on, hoping for reassurance, Dad told them that he would inform them of the details later, which brought voices of relief. The employees left the house. Once everyone was gone and it became quiet, Timothy's parents started complaining about how they couldn't live anymore.
The company's collapse means we'll lose this house, which was the collateral. Yes, exactly. Where are we supposed to live now?
Timothy sighed in exasperation at his parents, who were determined to blame us.
It's obviously your own fault. Maybe it's time you learned a bit of self-reflection.
He rebuked them, but it seemed they had no intention of listening. Unable to bear it anymore, I finally burst out in anger.
After all the trouble you've caused Timothy, getting carried away because you were business owners. Isn't this all because you only cared about titles?
My words prompted them to retort. But Dad intervened, not letting them speak.
A business owner is responsible. Taking responsibility is part of the job. Do your last duty properly.
Receiving a stern scolding from each of us, they were left speechless. Leaving the two of them behind, we departed from there. Eventually, they lost everything, the company, the house, and the land. They didn't offer any compensation to the former employees and seemed to have dodged the issue. However, having lost everything, they ended up arrested for Dash. They contacted Timothy for help, but he coldly refused, having cut ties with them. They're probably in jail now. Since then, we've received no contact from them. Even if they got out, they still had to atone for their actions towards the former employees. Timothy and I quit our jobs and joined Dad's company. For the first few months, We lived off our savings and worked without a salary, as promised. One day, we met some of the employees from Timothy's parents' company. Recognizing us, they rushed over, eagerly shaking our hands, expressing gratitude for the new job, and thanking Dad for taking them in. They thanked Timothy for arranging it and thanked me for my help. I didn't remember, but I had helped them with some documents when they first joined. Grateful for everything, they left, saying they'd continue to work hard. Hearing this, we felt relieved and hurried to Dad's office. He warmly welcomed us in his office and handed us thick envelopes.
What is this? It's your unpaid salaries. It didn't all fit in one envelope, so there are several.
Dad chuckled, leaving us astonished. We hadn't been here long enough to compensate for employing many new workers. Yet, we were being given our salaries. Bewildered, we just stood there. But Dad continued, thanking us.
Thanks to you, they work with enthusiasm. They always express their gratitude and worry about you. I couldn't shame myself by not paying such excellent employees. And our performance has definitely improved. Thank you.
Hearing this, we embraced and cried together. We had been so focused on ourselves that we're unable to see anything else around us. But more than that, we were moved by their concern for us. Then Dad said something even more heartwarming.
Timothy, I'm impressed with your leadership. If my daughter agrees, will you marry her?
Yes. Yes, of course. I promise I'll make her happy. With a tear-streaked face, Timothy promised me and Dad. I hugged him and cried together. So, we got married. We continue to work together at Dad's company, living happily. Gradually, work has become more efficient, allowing us to have a broader view of the company, even discussing productivity with Dad. Timothy visits the factory and subsidiaries, asking about inconveniences and proposing solutions, staying very busy. We both work with more passion than at our previous jobs. Finding fulfillment really does change one's work ethic. But soon, that will have to be put on hold. I'm taking maternity leave from Dad's company. Dad, Timothy, everyone at the company, and I are all looking forward to the arrival of our grandchild.